Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second Clips screening event where we're showing two films by Martin Creed. This film screening programme is under the auspices of the Artist Rooms Research Partnership, of which I am the director, and Andrew, we'll introduce in a moment, was the director before me. The Artist Rooms Research Partnership is led by the University of Edinburgh and is there to produce high quality research and public events like this one around the collection, which numbers 39 artists, including Roy Lichtenstein, who'll pop up in a minute, who's the latest artist to join the collection, has a show on at the moment at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. We are running two more events after this one in the Clips season. Ed Ruscha's Premium and Miracle, and those films are coming all the way from Los Angeles, aren't they?
Yeah. Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills they're coming from. And finally Bill Viola's Red Tape. Those of you who were here last time will know that we didn't have much time for discussion because Andy Warhol never made short films. This is going to be rather different this evening, and there will be quite a lot of space for us to discuss the films we see. And in general, that's our approach to these things. Some of you will know our series Café des Artistes, which focuses on an artist from the collection and involves public discussion. So there's coming up. Our next Café des Artistes is on Roy Lichtenstein. It will be at the Modern Gallery at Modern One over in Belford Road. So we very much hope you'll be able to join us for that event on the 27th of April as we move around different venues. And if you want to know what we're up to, please like our Facebook page, which is really where you get the latest information, and you can find out about booking our events. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Andrew, who is Professor of Scottish Visual Culture and my colleague in History of Art at the University of Edinburgh. And he's been writing about Scottish and international art since the late 80s. And he's written on contemporary sculpture in Scotland, a book on the artist Stefan Geck, and Anatomy Acts in 2006, which won the Medical Book of the Year award from the Royal Society of Medicine. And actually Andrew's written quite a lot on Martin Creed in the Artist Rooms collection, and he's about to publish an article on Creed's work number 1059, which you might know as the Scotsman's Steps, for the journal Architecture and Culture. When does that come out?
Later this year.
Later this year. And Andrew, you might also know, is a curator, organised exhibitions at the Hayward Lane Gallery, and he's got something coming up later this year at City Art Centre. Dovecot. Right, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Andrew, and it's going to be his job to make you able to cope with these films.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to sit. I'd rather move around, actually. I may end up moving around, but I think because it's mic'd, maybe I'd better be here for a little while. Just a couple of very quick things. I only wanted to say two things before we look at the films. Actually, three things. One is thanks to Neil, thanks to all the student helpers, thanks to Sills for putting this together. I can only think that in Scotland we take our art so seriously that we give up a night like this to go into a basement to watch people being sick. I mean, that's what I like about Scottish art history. It's hardcore stuff, you know, and take no prisoners. So the second thing I was going to say is that I have noticed, and those of you who have been students in my classes here will have noticed that quite often it's difficult to get really serious, engaged texts, discussion, conversations on a lot of Scottish art. A lot of it is hidden away in catalogue articles or in blogs, and really serious, extended discussions tend to be quite hard to come by. And I'm very keen that any chance to take an artist who resists quite serious discussion, I would say, we'll come on to this, is somebody who I would like to hear from you about how you might read Creed's work. And if I was going to give you any advice, it was, we can go as as pretentious as you want on this, because no one really goes pretentiously on Creed. They kind of treat him as rather frivolous and somewhat funny, and then they walk away. And I'm going to say, no, I think we can be a lot more pretentious, and we can be Sude's corner on Creed, and I'm going to prove it to you. And hopefully you can prove it to yourselves as well. And lastly, I was just going to say that my direct knowledge and awareness of Creed does go back quite a long time. I first got to know this work around about 1993, so that's 22 years ago already, and met him the year after. I selected him to be in the Scottish Contemporary Sculpture book that I did that came out in 1999, and he was getting quite a reputation there. It was 2 years before he won the Turner Prize. But I'd actually asked him to be in the book around about 1994, and he really was not very well known at all then. I'm delighted that his career has moved along incredibly speedily. But in fact, it wasn't Martin Creed I got to know first, it was his dad. His dad I met in 1988, 89, and John Creed, who was the head of silversmithing and metalwork at Glasgow School of Art. Unusually, for a well-known Scottish artist, Martin Creed has nothing really to do with Glasgow School of Art, weirdly enough. He was born in Wakefield. His dad took the job in Glasgow, and that's why he moved up and was brought up in Glasgow, but he trained in England. John Creed is a wonderful man, and Martin would have been about 15 at the time, who I say I didn't know, and we met at a Quaker summer school in the north of England, where John and I went over one summer. So I certainly didn't know that he had an artist son. But I do think that gives you one little hint, that some of the interests that Martin Creed talks about are quite on the spiritual side, are quite on the immaterial side. So maybe we'll see that, as well as seeing a lot of material as well. Okay, so that's a few little things, and I'm going to talk a little bit longer after we've seen the films. I think we're going to show the walking film first. Then we're actually going to have a very tiny little quick break for people to grab a quick drink and settle down and watch the only slightly longer Sick film, and then we will improvise. Okay? Okay, so I've got about 3 one-liners really after that. One would be that the Stills staff will be now serving vegetable curry for everyone who wants any. No, that's not true. The other thing we could say that those of you that go to clips of Bill Viola will get something very different, but we can discuss that too. But what I was going to do then, eventually I think we should get that changed, but I'll keep talking now if that's all right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context, I suppose, for that, because I think you all need context. I can tell you just need a little bit of context, and then we can get to discuss in the detail of the film. So one of the things I was going to say initially was that even re-looking at those films reminds me still that despite, particularly in the second film, your generally initial reaction, I guess most people hadn't seen the whole thing before. You might have seen clips, but you maybe haven't seen the whole thing before. There's actually an awful lot of, I think, quite deep and thoughtful emotions and ideas going on in that. But you kind of need to get a little bit beyond the obvious kind of disgusting horror, and also probably quite nauseous. I mean, some of you might have thought 1 and 2 was quite funny, and then after about 7 or 8 or 9, I think your emotions tend to change. It can get a little bit queasy. And even though I've seen that many times, and I've also, from this anatomy exhibition that Neil was talking about, I went around a number of dissecting rooms. You get desensitized to these things. But I think many of you, some of you in particular, I saw, were not desensitized to it at all. It's really quite startling in a way. So one of the things I was going to say in terms of context is that despite the messiness, despite the informality, Creed is almost very unusual in terms of working to organizing principles and first principles. Those two things play out a lot in his work. He thinks all the time about organizing principles, how he organizes his work. Now, the most obvious way is when he started a few years into his career of numbering the works. So a few have subtitles, but all of them are numbered sequentially. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, the other thing he has is it's a work, but it's also, again, more like a philosophy, which is the whole of the world plus the work equals the whole of the world. And he made a little text piece that said that. The whole of the world plus the work, meaning the artwork, equals the whole of the world. Sounds very algebraic, but it's quite interesting in terms of philosophically, when an artist adds in a work into the world just gets that little bit larger. All the materials inside the world get reorganized, and the world contains the artist's work again. So on one level, it registers the artist's constant need to make work, but also the way that the earth just envelops that work. There's nothing that the artist can do that will be any other than the world, an addition to the world. Another thing he does in terms of first principles, I mentioned organizing principles, but first principles, is that a lot of his interviews and a lot of his discussion, I would say underneath it is doubt. There's a doubtfulness always. And he actually then is not new. He's in a lot of... So counting is one thing. Numbering his works, a lot of his works involve numbers. There's a counting and measuring and quantifying. And in this, he belongs to, I would say, a lineage that goes back to conceptual art of the 60s. Dan Graham comes to mind in particular, but where everything is governed by some sense of quantifying. Okay, so that's important. Another first principle is evidenced in the work he did, which was number 1020, which was the work he did called Ballet, with Ballet Rambert. And he did it at the same time as he had an exhibition here in the Fruit Market in 2011, and it was at the Traverse. Did anyone see that work, by the way? Can I ask? Did anyone see that work here? No? Okay, it was a work where he collaborated with dancers, ballet dancers, highly trained classical ballet dancers in Ballet Rambert, and they danced a sequence, a set of sequences of the 6 basic moves that a ballet dancer needs to know. And he flipped and he changed the combinations. And it was an hour and a half, and it was an incredibly intense explication of the moves that a dancer needs to know. He didn't put any additional interpretation on that. He just got the 6 basic moves, and he got the dancers to try to remember sequences, which was actually very difficult. Another comparison there would be musicians trying to play the music of Philip Glass. You know, the need to remember these or Steve Reich, these very elaborate sequences. So that was 4 years ago now that he did here. And in that dance piece, you find something which I think permeates all his work around this notion of doubt, which is very, very simple things can become very, very complicated. Because as you build them up in an emergent kind of way, very, very ordinary things, mundane things, become worrisome. And those of you who've seen Martin Creed install an exhibition, there's a little clip of that on the Tate website, installing his work in the Intelligence exhibition, which was 2002, you'll see this notion of, if I do something, what will I do? If I don't do something, what won't happen? You know, this existential doubt, this feedback loop to himself. And a key work, and this is the little clip that you see in the Intelligence sequence, Intelligence was the name of the exhibition, is one of his works is, get this right, it is, work number 79, so it's quite an early work, that's it's 1993, and it's called Some Blue Tack Needed rolled into a ball, and depressed against a wall. And that was one of the works that he showed in the exhibition at Tate. Now, what I thought was interesting, so what you see is Martin Creed and two curators, Charles Escher and Virginia Button, who did the exhibition with him, worrying about where this knob of blue tack would go on the wall. Should it go up a bit? Should it go down a bit? Is it the right size? Is it being pressed in enough? Has it not been? And this sequence carries on, and it becomes a little bit absurd after a while. Why are they taking so long? Are these curators, doing the chin scratch, and Martin Creed saying, maybe that, and backs away, and they go back, and it becomes a parody of curating and positioning something in an exhibition. It becomes funny in its own right. But I've looked again recently at the title, and that title, Some Blue Tack, Kneaded, Rolled into a Ball, and Depressed Against a Wall. And I thought, that's an unusual word, depressed against a wall. But it chimed with something that I think is one of the clues into why Martin Creed's work can be taken a bit more seriously. It should be pressed into a wall, pressed against a wall, depressed. And then I put it together with the fact that in a lot of his interviews, he talks about, what can I do that will make me happy? What can I do that will make me feel better? That will make my mood rise? And he hasn't said explicitly, but I think there's something around happiness and deep satisfaction in leading your life, which sounds very grand, particularly when we've seen two quite flippant, funny films in many ways. But more and more, I think he talks about dealing with melancholia, dealing with depression, and seeking happiness. And once you filter that kind of idea through a lot of his work, I think it completely changes the way you see what he does. He plays the art game very well. When I first met him, he wasn't very well known at all, but he always struck me as a very, very ambitious, a very, very focused individual. And now I see the fact that whilst he is that, and he's able to play many of the kind of the maneuvers you need to make a successful art career that he's certainly done, behind it is quite a truthful art. It's quite direct. It's quite honest in terms of what can I do, what can any artist do that will make them feel better, and by extension make other people engage with it as an honest contribution. So I would always, and I think we should, when we think about these films, we should bear that in mind, is that there is, despite the front, there's something around mental health, which I think is also of great interest to him. I also, when I wrote this article that will come out later in the year, which again is probably one of the longest things written on Creed, because most of the things are so short, I took the fact that he did 104 steps in Edinburgh based on 104 different marbles from across the world, repeating no marble and putting aesthetically arranging no marble. So randomness, a random sequence of 104 marbles, which the Scotsman Steps is. I related that partly to melancholia, the idea of earth, the idea of if you're melancholic, you have too much of the earth in old alchemical ways of thinking. So, and he also, in a lovely little video, he sang a song when it opened in 2011. He sang a song on the steps of the Scotsman Steps, and he talked about the staircase, and on the staircase there's a head case with a suitcase. And that's a joke for those of us who lived in Edinburgh for many, many years. We know that in the 70s and 80s, that stairwell between Northbridge and Waverley was a terrible place to go. Quite dangerous, it could be, but also rather threatening, but also a bit of a shelter for people who didn't have a home. So it was a rather awkward space that was absolutely right in the centre of Edinburgh, right next to the tourist trade and the kind of the environment that Edinburgh likes to show. In the middle of it was this twisted arcade, as I called my essay, this twisted arcade of rather more difficult and problematic urban space. But he talked about head cases with suitcases. Now again, it's a very Creed kind of joke, but I think he's talking about psychological space inside the city, which I think makes that whole piece, as in addition to the fact it's a great work of art, I think, in any case, it gives it this slightly darker hue. Okay? Right, so I would we'll get on to the films now. And the reason why I didn't want to talk about the films in advance is that it is really important, I think, that you just see them. And all I really want to say about the films before we open it out for a bit more of a conversation is, in the walking film, you can see that he's determined that the camera will move right to left, left to right, right to left, left to right, in an absolutely rigid formation. So formally, he's stripped it down to identical moves. So that echoing, that duality that is in almost all of his works is there in that film. He rarely includes himself in films. When he does, I'm aware of his band, Awada. Awada is a three-piece band who were playing music that you heard there. He's in those films. But other than that, he tends to collaborate with people. He tends to ask people to be part of his films. So it's not about him directly, okay? So he uses other people. But I would say, I would throw in some associations with the walking film. One is I would throw in Abbey Road. I would throw in this idea of a canonical music image of people walking along a Pelican Crossing, in effect. Although this is set in New York, this film, rather than in London. He's clever in terms of he's always thinking of popular references out the way. I would go further and I would say that he's usually mocking or showing some kind of awareness of high art. So I'm going to throw in the fact that there might even be some kind of reference to Richard Long's A Line Made by Walking, which is also in the Artist Rooms collection. So a key piece of early conceptual land art by the English artist Richard Long in 1967, that piece is. And what we might want to also discuss is the types he chooses, or the types that eventually get edited into the film. He may have shot many more. I'm not quite sure how many people he shot in making that film. So there's various kinds of references there and various kind of complications around that film. But also let me throw in a few things about the Sick film. A few of the art references I think are fairly obvious in a way, but let me just say that one might be Manzoni's Artist Shit. Now he does do another set of films, by the way, Creed does, of people shitting in a very similar white space gallery, okay? So they just do little poos and then walk away, okay? So you didn't see that tonight. So for those of you who didn't enjoy the Sick film, you can be relieved. Thank God he didn't show the poo film. But this idea of what goes in and what goes out is here. I'll take that for a little bit of a walk, if I may, in a minute. So there's that. For those of you who appreciate the Scottish art connections, I'm going to throw in the Boyle family. Now, the Boyle family in the 60s did an amazing set of performances which used all the human bodily fluids in a performance: blood, semen, vomit, urine, sweat, tears, in an early performance. It was one of the most kind of radical moves in 1960s performance art. Joan Hill's coming from Edinburgh, Mark Boyle coming from Glasgow, and then making their career down in London. So it's not new, the idea of using vomit in artwork. And performance art of the 60s is one place that you could go with that. But the thing which strikes me most, and I'll probably leave this before we kind of open it up for a discussion, is, and you might shoot me down with this, but I'm going to give it a go anyway, is I think that probably the strongest reference here is probably Jackson Pollock. And I think there's, and I'll explain why, on an obvious level, formally, the idea of spreading and not being completely in control of what's happening at your feet and reversing out, as Pollock did when he painted these works. On a white canvas that is on the floor as a performative gesture. Okay? So once you get over the grossness of what's happening, I think there's an absolute connection to Nameless's famous films in the 50s of Pollock doing his own painting, which was a crucial insight into this rather mythic figure in New York and how he made his work. So Creed, in a way that's influenced much more by pop art and much more by the 1990s YBA kind of culture, does this performative gesture that is something around abstract expressionism. And one of the reasons I think this is not just the way it looks, but also notice the fact that people did different colours. Well, they did very similar colours, actually. They did different shapes. They did different shapes. Some of them, the girl with the blue top, she was brilliant. And there was a later woman all in black who did really, really well. Some people I thought failed, particularly the woman at the beginning. She kind of failed to do a particularly good job, I thought. She struggled with it. So there's an individuality to how people were sick that is not irrelevant at all, I don't think, to this. But what I was going to say to finish up on is this notion of expressionism. So I think Creed is fascinated by how an artist expresses themselves. And he's talked in interviews about expressing, about what does expressing even mean when an artist says they express themselves. And he boiled it down to trying to get your innards out, trying to make the inside, this invisibleness, the immaterial or the ineffable, materialized. And I think what he's doing here is he's making some kind of comment. You could take it seriously or you could kind of dismiss it, but it's something around expressionism, I think, that's going on. And on that note, I will stop my brief introduction. And but why don't we get some discussion going around this? Does anyone want to while I'm on the sick films, and that is clearly the one that I think you have an immediate reaction to. Yeah, Denise, please, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that I really agree with you, and I'm so surprised because literally I made my note that it reminds me of Jackson Pollock, and then you said it, so I'm really pleased that we agree on this.
Well, Denise, you did my class last year, so you're clearly thinking, no, we didn't talk about that, no, you're right, but you're clearly thinking in the right way. Thank goodness for that. Yeah, so it rang a chord for you then. So my opening gambit is that going too far, but in terms of what you
yeah,
thought?
I was worried that I was going too far, but yeah, I don't know, it kind of, yeah.
I think going too far is good. That's why I said at the very beginning, people don't go far enough. Anyway, does anyone want to respond to that or build on that?
That's something you've spoken to Martin about?
Sorry?
Does he see that parallel between himself and Jackson Pollock as pure speculation?
Yeah, it's my speculation.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So one of the things we could talk about a little bit, and those of you that have seen, I think a few I was talking to, people who've seen Martin speak, he belongs to a category of artists who themselves play with the idea of how seriously to take their own work. And the YBA, the 1990s generation in London, which is certainly one of the products of, I think is very much part of that, is they're not quite sure whether they should behave like Gerhard Richter, take themselves extremely seriously and have read relevant books, or somebody like Andy Warhol and deny very much background reading or knowledge and be rather cool about what they say. Creed's not cool, he's quite open and honest the way he speaks, but he's not Richter either. So I haven't said, do you think your work is a quote or a kind of a play with the idea of abstract expressionism? I think he would laugh off most interpretations, possibly. But that's not to say that the interpretations are wrong, of course, because artists, I believe, have very little ownership over the meaning of their work once they do it. They have total ownership over the work itself, and they have total freedom to do what they want. But once they open it to a public domain, it becomes part of culture, and then it becomes part of the whole world. So I would say that he probably would resist most readings that would become too elaborate about his work. But does people think that's actually would defend not being elaborate? Is a good thing? So you had a question.
Do you remember that? I think you were there when James Elkins was in ECA, and he read him aside when he realised he talked about the stories in the book and said he wanted to know what an artist's work is about, but the artist would be the last person who speak about it and say, stick about it. It's quite clear that the artist only had limited knowledge.
Yeah.
And their responsibility to shape the work up.
No, thank you for that. And I'm not saying that the art historian has more, but I'm saying that no one has any less than the artist, which includes everyone here who may or may not have looked at art or be an artist or be an art historian. It releases the work into a wider frame. And to be honest, a lot of Martin Creed's work is popular with kids. The balloon works, the environments he builds. There's kind of an immediacy. You can make some of his paintings by buying a set of paintbrushes from B&Q and doing it. You know, it is a lot of it is quite immediate. Some of it is rather more elaborate, but like the Scotsman Steps. But much of it is very immediate. And I went around the big show he had at the Hayward Gallery, and there was a lot of family groups and a lot of very young people in there taking it at kind of face value, which is exactly what I'm not doing, but they were, which is great. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of juxtapose the Franco B instead of Jackson Pollock, with the blood coming from and kind of being the canvas and having this repetitive catwalk. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that came to my mind when I saw that.
The Franco B performance. I mean, I'm no expert on performance, but there's also Carolee Schneemann. There's a number of artists who've done performative works that leave a trace.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's right. It may be that he's looking at more. I think the point, though, whatever he is looking at, or even not looking at, is valid in terms of I think he is aware of it and he's registering it, but in a very light touch kind of way.
Which is not Franco B light touch because it's too intense. This performance with the blood flowing everywhere.
That's
like,
right.
you know, whereas that is just a film. It wasn't a performance.
That's right. It was a performance. That's right.
B is a performance always.
And the ability, though, of also all performance art to also be taken to take itself very seriously, which is no bad thing, but that's also something which I think Martin Creed kind of goes a little bit against.
And you've taken it seriously enough to make a film, so what, I don't know much about him, this is great news to me, but what do we know about his rationale behind it?
The Sick film, or do you mean generally?
Sick film, yeah.
Well, I'm going to say it is about the problem of how to express yourself. I think it is that. So, but the form he chooses is, I don't know his creative process in terms of he thought, oh, well, I'll do that. That would be an interesting. What he might have done, and I'm just thinking in terms of his method, it would be, what's the most simple elemental things that people do? He's also got a kind of a sex film as well, which is also on a kind of a loop. And it's and you see the setup of it, and it's very objective, and it's rather strange. It's kind of obviously hints at pornography, but it's sort of a conceptual art. It's, you know, it's kind of a very formal thing to do, a bit like the Sick film as well. So the basic human functions. He's probably thought, right, shitting is one, being sick is one, and then maybe I would suggest kind of plays with, well, how to do it then. Do I do it in public? Do I do it in the gallery? Do I do it as a live performance? Do I do it as a recorded performance to camera? Which is what he ends up doing. It goes back to that kind of question I think you asked before. How seriously we take it, or how elaborate we want to get with it, is up to us. A lot of people laugh at Martin Creed's work and they enjoy it, and then they move away. A bit like maybe Dave Strigley's cartoons. You can laugh at Dave Strigley's cartoons, many people do, but they don't give it a second thought. And I think with Creed, all I'm saying is I think there's a huge hinterland with Creed to take it more seriously. But for some people, that might be pushing the claims made for it a bit too far.
I'd be interested to know who was involved in the film and what his relationship with them were, how much that has to do with the art itself as well as persuading them into being sick.
Yeah. I'm a bit sketchy on that one. What I think happens is his practice has slightly changed. When he did the earliest films, they would be in this network of London artists. You know, he lived in Hackney, and it was a big artist network. It would be people that he knew, and that's how it would happen. He would sort of chat to people about being part of the film. But I'm not aware of him doing what other artists have done, which is advertising for people. You know, Gillian Waring and many other YBA artists have advertised to play. I'm not sure it's quite worked like that, but he does have a very large, I mean now he's very successful, he does have a much larger network. But I also think in terms of the demographic of most of those people, they are probably peers of his, other friends, artists, technicians, people that he knows, or people who, 2 or 3 degrees of separation type thing. But I'm not quite sure. I wonder if it's important. It might be important how he actually does it. What I would say is that some artists, when they include other people, they can be rather unethical about the boundary between how they get people involved or not. I think in this case it's very open, it's very negotiated, and it's very clear. And you either buy into it, like they all did, apart from the first woman who tried, but didn't quite get there. But you buy into it in good faith. But maybe other people disagree. I don't know. Sure.
You talked about some of the sort of artistic potential reference points in performance art and painting, but I was interested, these are both moving image works, and I was thinking, my own associations with, at least with the walking film, in terms of that the walking is a kind of an elemental image in the history of cinema, and the history of motion pictures, that even before sort of cinematograph was invented, that the first sort of human activities to document motion were walking, and that the first people sort of to theorize what cinema would reveal, the gestures they picked were, as you say, the most basic, most minimally expressive, and most functional ones, which were walking, and that's where you notice what you wouldn't have noticed in sort of simple observation. So I'm kind of interested in either film, what you sort of see in terms of either cinematic or sort of motion picture or photographic sort of associations or reference points.
Photographic, I did have a note about Muybridge, the idea of early marrying, early photography. But you're absolutely right, that's a great point, is that let's study a horse running, a man walking, those kind of or a bird flying, very, very simple gestures, which in a way is appropriate because the technology is new. So studying things which seem to have a baseline reality seems correct. I think then it can get more complicated, and then you can start to do different things as the technology grows. So in cinema, but also the still image, appropriately for here, I think Muybridge is there. Again, the framework is very, very tightly set. The variables are more clearly seen when the frameworks are tightly set. So I think in terms of the Sick film, cinematically, I'm interested to see if anyone else can pull anything in. It's one of those taboo operations, a bit like going to the toilet, which is not often cinematically depicted. Being sick, apart from train spotting, I'm struck. Maybe there's art films. Come on, if you're here on a nice night like this, you must have watched other films with people being sick, and surely. So I'm.
Not the Prodigy video. Prodigy.
Yeah.
Video's got elements.
That's true, and that would be a good date. That would be 90s, wouldn't it? That would be the right kind of date. So music videos, and that would be a good source, I would say. I'm pulling in some canonical 20th century art, but easily the creative moves that are made in pop videos by creative directors would I think be part of it. I don't know if there's anything else.
Can I also throw in a Billy Connery routine, which came immediately to my mind looking at Sick, because Billy Connery said several things. He had a wonderful routine which involved people calling on Huey.
Yeah, Huey and Jeff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he did say that whether he'd eaten it or not was always diced carrot in the vomit.
That's right.
And that sort of became very, very obvious, even though they obviously the vomit was very contrived in that they'd obviously taken a very large amount of liquid emetic in advance. So you've got really quite strange textures of vomit if you think about it. If you think about when you are sick, which hopefully isn't too often, it actually doesn't look very much like that. That's really quite different in texture from the normal vomit. Normal vomit. Yeah. When you've got a bug of some kind.
Do you run masterclasses on this? You seem to.
No, but I feel. When I was looking at that, I was thinking of times when the children were small and sort of threw up all over everywhere, and all the passing bugs that I've had at various times. And I think it's actually quite interesting when you look at these things. I noticed that you picked out the woman with the blue blouse as almost a kind of professional bulimic, which you sort of you felt about her compared to the first girl who didn't have the faintest idea how to, to actually make herself sick, which, she should have learned, really.
Yeah.
But possibly, well, if she was going to do it, I mean, if she'd signed up for it,
Sure.
Possibly because she
Sloppy,
wasn't first,
bad
possibly
preparation.
she was filmed first. And if she was filmed first, having not had the emetic, I mean, only for a short time, whereas some of the others had it swelling around for a bit longer, then, it might have given her more difficulty.
Yeah.
But really, I feel she should have done a bit better if she was, if she'd signed up for it in the first place.
You've raised a lot of good points there, actually, I think. I take it the fact that he seems to have got them to not only taking the emetic, but also eaten something that would mainly produce red. So you're right, it doesn't look like normal vomit. By the way, sorry, this is a slight tangent, but when I was thinking about those sick films, in the late 90s, Stills Gallery here had a very lovely photography show by an artist called Jeff Weston. I don't know if anyone remembers this, it's going back quite a way. And he is a Newcastle photographer, and he was fascinated by, being a Newcastle man, you see where I'm going with this, what the pavements look like on a Sunday morning. And he took very aesthetic photographs, still photographs of vomit, and put it upstairs in the exhibition. And he was fascinated by the aesthetics around this. And maybe that's, again, another kind of funny link.
Well, vomit is aesthetic, so long as you can't actually smell it. If you can just look at it, it's actually quite, you've got quite pretty pictures of, there's sort of like Rorschach ink splashes, kind of stuff, that was really quite attractive, and you can start looking for patterns in it. But if you can smell it, then it becomes something completely different.
That's right, and that's probably why the Ballet Rond bears a better performance than the sick film, I would say.
Yes.
Because your visceral, although again what Sophia was talking about with other performative, transgressive work can also be rather disgusting and difficult to be in the same room as, where sick is visually quite, watching you, about 60 or 70% of you visually looked as if you weren't having a good time. One person was eating popcorn, but only one, which is a brave move. Yes, that's right. But in terms of that kind of bodily, somatic being in the place at the same time, no, I think you're right. There's still a slightly abstracted notion, which I think is also underlined by the whiteness. Everything's thought through. He's made it very, very white.
The walking thing was really contrived as well. With the people that he picked, and the way he got them to move.
I think we should talk about the walking film too, of course, but can I just before we do, because it does relate to if there are any other areas of problematic choices he's made or associations. And actually you mentioned bulimic, and so I would have said that one of the issues around the film might be whether you should read it at all in relation to bulimia. It's not something that I would necessarily do, but I think it's completely there to be read in that way. But I don't know. That's a question really for everyone who's looked at it.
That certainly struck me. I thought about that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's when I think of it now. It's kind of very,
especially the first one that couldn't actually do it. Because I thought I can't actually make myself sick. Can't stop myself being sick. I wouldn't say.
So what did you think of that? That's not so much an art reference, but it's a social reference.
Yeah, you talked about his mental state as well, so it might have been something to comment on
absolutely.
Human condition and behaviour.
Yeah. So thank you. I was hoping we would get unravel or look at new areas which I certainly hadn't thought of before. But I suppose going then to the walking film, I don't know quite how he recruited the walkers, but there's clearly something going on with the walkers. I don't know whether anyone wants to.
Did you think they were all genuine, or do you think some of them were acting?
Let me throw that out. Rather than me jump to a conclusion, what did people say?
The first three were genuine. I've got friends who are ill in that manner. That's genuine. And the prosthetic leg, the knee lock move, you don't learn that one for a joke. That's a steel leg. They're real.
So you didn't think there was any?
But the later ones,
the hopping one and the dragging one, I can't see why he's not using an aid.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And also, do you remember Heather's sister with no legs?
Nope.
A thalidomide baby, a friend of a friend, obviously, donkeys years ago.
Sure.
her feet were attached pretty much to her hips. So her only means of walking was actually on her hands, and she used to swing her body right through. And this guy, you know, just trailing his legs. I mean, you wouldn't do that if your legs weren't working for some reason, and even if they were fixed in that position, you wouldn't actually move like that.
I mean, I agree with that, because I was watching this at the beginning as this sort of like basic human action. Okay, so it was presented as this kind of basic thing, and we are like focusing into it because we have these extreme ways of walking, which are the sort of disabled bodies in different ways, but they are trying to walk across this road. So I thought we are really paying attention to this basic action, but then it just turned into something else, because when they are on the floor, like you say, in the normal setting, that person would be on a wheelchair. There's no need to be, you know, dragging yourself like this.
If you did have to drag, you would not be wearing jeans, you'd be wearing a protective layer, because otherwise you'd be tearing your legs apart.
Yeah.
But that's got to be fake.
Well, I've got a view on it, but it's interesting to see whether other people disagree with that. I think I registered some people who probably thought they were all genuine.
I think they're all genuine.
Some people do, obviously.
I think they were all genuine, but they were, with the exception of the gentleman with the artificial limb, they were walking without the aids that they might normally use. A wheelchair, for example, for the gentleman who dragged himself in the jeans, or the gentleman who was essentially hobbling. Did he have a broken leg? Would he normally have crutches to do his manoeuvring?
There was an older lady who was struggling even with the pavement.
Yeah.
The film's actually fascinating because it allows you to stare when you would normally be absolutely socially forbidden from staring.
But were people staring anyway? And maybe they were staring at the guy filming. We don't know.
Well, yeah, no, that's a good point. I think what you... Sorry, no, please.
I feel like the guy filming gives permission to stare because it's a thing to look at because he's looking.
Remember that was set in New York, where I think a lot of the roads are used all the time for films. This is probably quite a downbeat, low-budget one compared to what they're used to. But no, that idea of if there is a camera rolling, then people do gather as a matter of course. I'm tempted I'm tempted that we allow you to either chat more over any more popcorn or refreshments at the back. But if there's anyone else got a question or another point they want to raise, or I won't go away, you can always chat afterwards. Yeah, sure.
I would like to refer back to what the lady said about the reference to Billy Connolly. I think something I always think of Martin Creed. Forgive me, I don't know the gentleman, I do know some of his work. But perhaps with reference to sick film, he is more than just his tongue in his cheek, but he clearly is a bit of a joker. And there is a lot of this, how would I put it, reverence to things, and I'm wondering if he sets something in motion, and only after he has set it in motion does he realise all the ramifications, just as we are doing this evening with the artwork. I mean, you referred to, thank heavens we couldn't smell it, but there was a point during the sick film where I realised the first couple, I thought, oh, this is a bit much, and then suddenly it didn't seem a bit much, and suddenly I was remembering events in my life and my children's life, and I was remembering almost, forgive me, Proustian moments of life. I think you referred to it, the children being sick.
Absolutely.
You know, when you've had children, I can remember vividly sicknesses that they had, or not sicknesses, vomiting experiences they had, and some of them I remember with fond affection, etc. Forgive me.
Absolutely. I mean, how far could they project the puree carrot, you know, across the room? It's just astonishing.
But can I say also friends instead of children? Like,
but I mean,
yes.
I remember live very tied to a friend. So I got the same feeling. After a while, I was, it's not that bad.
Everyone loves the smell of the vomit of their children or best friends. I think, and I think on that note. Sorry. I was like.
There's one, because quite a lot of you here are from Edinburgh College of Art, and I have to vomit into the wind and get my own back. But when I studied at Edinburgh College of Art, Jake Harvey was a relatively young man then, and one of his favourite phrases when discussing sculpture was, "I like the way it meets the ground." And I have to say, in some of these occasions, I thought of Jake Harvey discussing with the artist, "I like the way the vomit meets the ground."
I can see Jake saying that. I've got another Jake 6 story, but I'm going to leave it. You'll be pleased to hear. But can I just again thank the Stills staff and the Artist Room staff and helpers for this, and also obviously thank you for your time and also for some fantastic questions and observations. Thank you all very much. Thank you.